In this video, we're going to make a sign. In fact, we're going to make this sign. It's a solid maple sign with inlays of walnut and African Padauk. And it's based on this logo. This logo is for Dead Man's Island Kayak and Stand-Up Paddleboards. It's a business owned by a friend of mine. And he didn't commission this. He doesn't even know it's being built. It's a gift for him. We'll send it to him at the end of the program.
Before we get to building, a quick story. This is my friend Scott. We grew up together in the Great Pacific Northwest, and while we now live a few states away from each other, we've been able to keep in touch through the magic of social media. For several years, Scott had been acting as his mother's caretaker in the final years of her life. Scott's unique gift is to spread joy into other people's lives, and about a year ago, he started Dead Man's Island Kayak and Stand-Up Paddleboard. You can see Dead Man's Island in the background here. Now, I wanted to give Scott a sign that was made out of solid wood. If you remember though, his company logo sits on a solid red background. That presented me a bit of a challenge. There is no solid wood that's naturally red like that. So I decided to take a little creative license and change the background to a lighter color, one that could be used for both the lettering as well as the skull that makes up the sign's centerpiece. So the first step was to glue up some maple. And once the maple was all dry, we had to flatten it out and put it through the planer. With the background of the sign matching the lettering in the skull, I really wanted to make sure that the grain pattern stayed consistent across the entire sign. So while I planned to inlay the highlights like the oars, the earphones, and the hair, I needed to keep the maple at its original height. Now, I don't own a CNC machine, and the pattern here was far too intricate to carve out using a standard router. So I got the shaper tape out and I sent some files I created on my computer over to the shaper to carve the space out. I started with this smaller lettering at the bottom of the sign. At this point I was a little bit nervous because the space in between these letters is actually quite small, and I hadn't used the shaper to do something this fine before. But here you can see that I'm tracing out the letters as I go, going around the outline of them. Once the outline is done, I can pick it back up and start working on what it calls the pockets that are left over. So I went back, starting from the right, working to the left. All of this space is going to be eventually filled in with a red epoxy so that it still matches somewhat the logo from Scott's business. Now you can see here that I had nothing to worry about. It actually turned out quite nice. A couple of passes with some light sandpaper to knock off the edges, and all of the lines came out really clear. With my confidence boosted, I move on to the oars, and I use the shaper to get the outline there. Now I tried to use the same technique to clear out the sawdust and blow it out. That didn't work, so I grabbed my knife and I tried scraping it out. That also didn't work. So to the vacuum I went, and here you can see as the sawdust comes out, the outline took a really nice clean shape. I'll come back later and take out the insides of that so that we can set an inlay into it. But for now, we'll just clean up the edges a little bit and move on to the rest of the routing. After the oars, I moved up to the skull. For that part, I took out the portion that was the mouth and the eyes. I did that at a little bit of a lower depth before moving on to the portion that would cover the rest of the skull outline as well as the hair. After that, I moved up to the lettering that was at the top of the sign, and I went back and took out the material that was going to be for the hair's inlay. The inlay is at a 1/4 inch depth, and the part that's going to just take epoxy, I left it 1/8. With that work all done, I was able to take the shaper tape back off and get ready to start doing some of the hand tool working to clean it up. Now the router did a really good job at keeping the entire surface flat. There were just a couple of little places that I needed to go back, knock the ridges down so that the inlay would glue down flat. In addition, a few of the letters still were stuck together in some places, like for instance at the bottom of an A and an L next to each other. I needed to knock those out so that when we poured the epoxy in, each letter would be nice and distinct. I then went back with a quick pass of a light sandpaper, and then we could move on to the inlay work. I used the shaper again to create the inlays. In this case, this is walnut. I had created a separate shaper file for each of the materials that I was going to use. Here, the walnut is a 1-inch thick piece that's been butted up against the shaper plate, and instead of using the inside of the outline, I'm now going to the outside of that shape instead to cut it out. To give you a sense of how careful you have to be here, the video you're seeing here is being played at 4 times speed. So there's a lot of patience that goes into this. Once I cut out the oars and cleaned them out, I went back and I also did the shapes for the headphones that go next to the skull. With all of the dart shapes cut into the walnut board, I now needed to get the right thickness for that board. It started out at 1 inch and we had engraved down the outline just over 1/4 of an inch. So I'm now cutting roughly 1/4 of an inch off. I want it to stick up just a little bit above the maple board that has the skull and the rest of the sign on it, so that we can sand it down later. Cutting the pieces out with a resaw on the bandsaw like this does leave a little bit of a jagged edge on the back, but it's nothing a little bit of sanding can't knock right back down and make for a good gluing surface. Now before I put this glue down, I did dry fit the oars to make sure that they fit into their spot in the inlay. And they did, they fit perfectly. These computer files worked out great for that. So once the glue was in, I took the oars and I took the sawdust specks out and I got a little hammer, and about 1,000 hammer taps later, because of how tight it was, which is good, the oars were in place. Once they were in place, I wanted to see how it would look with the other inlay pieces of walnut, so I laid those out really quickly. I was pretty happy with what we saw there, but I can't glue these in place yet because I need to get that hair done first. Speaking of the hair, I now need to cut out the inlay for that hair, and you're going to see that I'm going to do this a little bit differently than I did the walnut. And before I go on at all, I have to say, look at this piece of wood. This has to be the orangest looking piece of wood I have ever bought from a hardwood store. I thought it was just perfect for this particular project. Right here, I'm cutting it out at just a little over 1/4 inch up depth. Now what I'm going to do differently for this particular inlay over the last one is that I'm not going to use the router at all to do it. This right here is a Glowforge laser cutter. And I've taken the exact same file that I would have used on the shaper and sent it over to this laser. Now the piece of Padauk is what you're seeing right here. And in order to make sure that that laser doesn't burn marks into it, I actually have to cover it with a tape. It's like a very wide roll of Scotch tape that I put onto it. But you can see here that the laser can go up much higher detail level than the router can, because the router has a 1/4 inch bit. And there is no way that you could have gotten the shapes that you see here with all the points and everything in them using just a router. So first I cut out the outline of the hair, and then I go back and cut out the pieces that were necessary to put the inlays of the walnut inside. Once that's done, a little careful job peeling off the tape, and we should be ready to try and fit the hair into the inlay. Now, to use a word from when Scott and I were growing up, I think this layout's looking pretty rad. What I'm doing here is a little bit difficult to see because my arm and my fat fingers are in the way, but the hair inlay did not quite fit with the routing out that I had done around the skull. And this isn't the fault of the shaper in any way, it's just that the router bit itself, I was using a 1/8 inch bit. The radius of the bit was 1/8 inch, and at 1/8 inch it could not do all of the details that were necessary for those little strands of hair that were coming in there. So I'm going back and forth here. I'm having to trace the little bits of wood that I need to cut out, and then I'm taking a very small chisel and trying to follow those lines as best I can and make straight cuts straight down so that I can get that inlay to fit. And it took several rounds going back and forth. You're not seeing all of the work that I had to do to get this all in place, but I did get it to the point where it fit in there in the end. Eventually, I did get it to the point where I could dry fit the hair into place. Once that was done, I was ready to glue it up. So, liberally putting some glue on the spaces and getting the thick spaces and the very thin lines at the top, I got it ready to put in. Now, it is still a tight fit, and in order to get it in there, I'm not going to be able to do this by hand. I'm going to have to bring the mallet back out. So if I thought it was 1,000 hits before to get those oars in, it's going to take 10 times that to use these little light taps to get this hair in. We definitely wouldn't want to get a nice blow on a delicate part of this hair and break a piece off. Everything was going perfectly. I got the hair all inlaid, no little broken pieces anywhere, and I decided for some reason that I needed just a couple more hits. And then this happened. I broke the top off with that little hit right there, and here I am wondering what it is that I can do about it. Now I have a couple options. I can go back and try and peel this thing out, but that's going to be difficult. That piece is sitting in there really tight. My other option is to quickly come back and glue in the maple inlay piece for the headband that goes right there. And if I get that piece in there and I put lots of glue on the sides of it, I can also pull in the broken hair piece right up next to that inlay, and it should still look okay. And in fact, Scott, if you're watching this, you probably didn't know I had a little fracture there, but it's there and you probably can see it now. Sorry about that. If you remember back to when I described the way I was going to do this, you'll recall that I said after I put this inlay in, between that inlay of the hair and the amount that I had carved out for the maple, there was going to be a little bead of epoxy, red epoxy that would run between the two, about 1/4 of an inch. So I actually ended up with quite a bit of space for me to work with in gluing that little broken piece of Padauk, the hair, back into place. And honestly, now that I've seen the final product from this sign, there's no one that will ever notice that fracture was there. Once I had the hair in place, I got to move on to the headphones that were made out of walnut. And a little bit of trickiness here, a little bit of puzzle fitting, because they look symmetrical, but they're not quite symmetrical. But I put the glue on it, spread it around liberally, was able to get those put in place and ready for gluing up together with the hair. These flat boards that I'm putting on here are called cauls. These aren't fancy cauls in any way, they're just regular boards that I took from my scrap. Put a little pressure on them and it puts pressure across the entire inlay. And with just a couple of them I can cover the whole thing. We let the glue dry for a couple hours and we should be ready to move on to the epoxy. I'm not entirely sure that this next step is actually necessary. What I'm doing here is I'm taking some clear epoxy and I'm just painting it around any place I want to put the colored epoxy. There's a couple of reasons for doing this. The first is that I'm using a dyed epoxy and I don't want that dye soaking into my white maple anywhere. And the second is that it is possible that if there's little air pockets in the cells of the wood, that it can come out and bubbles into your epoxy. Now, both of these things are pretty unlikely because maple is a pretty tight-celled wood, but I figured why not do things the right way. While I'm pretty familiar with maple and I still decided to put the epoxy on, I have never used epoxy with African Padauk. And so I wanted to be super safe there. So once I was done with the lettering portion of the sign, I went back and applied the same clear coat to the inlay portion, touched the walnut, touched the Padauk, touched the maple. Got that all ready for the red coat. The instructions on epoxy are quite clear. When you're mixing it together, you need to stir it slowly. And that is what I'm doing here. You just happen to be seeing me stirring it slowly at 4 times speed. I'm also using a dye that's designed to be a translucent epoxy dye. And I really do want a near opaque look, so I'm having to use a fair bit of red dye here from 2 different colors mixed together to come up with the mixture that I want. And I'm keeping track as I put this in to know how many drops of each in case I need to add a little more epoxy mix to fill this sign in. This is the satisfying part of epoxy, pouring it in. And I'm just going around here. I'm mostly trying to stay off of the letters, but not really. In the end, you have to make the epoxy stick up a little bit and then sand it back down to make it flat. So while I was able to avoid a few bits on the letters, I'm not too worried about that. It's okay if it mounds up a little bit and we have to clean it off later. And here's the most satisfying part. Just watch as the epoxy pours in and you really start to see the design of the logo pop out with this red, both around the outline and inside the skull. Check that out. Now, isn't that cool?
Well, it's been a week, and here we have the sign with the resin completely hardened. During that week I was off on vacation with my family, but this one's just been sitting here ready for us to get back to it. Now the resin sticks up a bit, and so does the Padauk orange here, and we need to get that back down to level. In addition to that, I wanted to put a border along the edges here, which means I need to square it up a little bit more. And then I was planning on putting maybe ½ an inch of walnut around to make a contrasting color. But I love this orange, this bright orange from the Padauk so much. What I'm thinking of doing is actually stepping it from the maple to that orange Padauk and then into the walnut. I think that'll look real nice. So in order to do that, we have to take our Padauk and cut it down a little bit and get it put together with the walnut and prepare this thing for a border. So I guess let's go make some orange sawdust.
And make some orange sawdust is what I did. So I grabbed the Padauk board and went over to the jointer, and we got some clean edge on one side, and then took it over to the table saw to get a clean edge on the other side, and then cut a couple of 1/8 inch strips off of that. I took those 1/8 inch strips and I attached the walnut that I had already cut. I did this in 2 sections on each board because I need 4 sides. Clamped that all up and gave it a couple of hours to sit and dry up with the glue. The Padauk was 1 inch thick and the walnut was 3/4, so the first thing I had to do was strip it down a little bit with the bandsaw and then with the sander. Once that was done, I was ready to square up the sign. And the first thing that needed to be done is to clean up the bottom edge and make it parallel, and then take it over to the miter saw, where I could add square edges, which we hadn't cleaned up since we did the glue up originally. So I did that, flipped it over a couple of times in order to get all the way across, and it was ready to attach the border. Getting the border strips ready was simply a matter of cutting miters. I went and cut one end for each of the miters to begin with, then took it over to the sign itself and marked it there. One thing to note is that when you're marking it, you should probably say which is left and which is right, and I put right on the left side and had to scratch that out and make it left again. But with them all marked, I can go over to the saw and cut the end miters on, and then go back and using the marks that I had written, including the one that was scribbled out, I could figure out where those pieces all fit back together, and they fit together just perfectly, ready for the glue up. The glue up was pretty standard for this border, just simple mitered pieces to go around the edges. One little complication was I had to make some adjustments. There's just a slight bend up on the lower right hand corner, but it wasn't too bad. And with the clamps in place, we had the glue ready, and a few hours later I was ready to take them off and get it ready for its final sand and finish. Now I started with an 80 grit sand, got the borders and the epoxy down to their right level, and then I moved up to 120 and 150 and all the way up to about 500. And you can see at the end here I've got the sanding dance going as I'm finishing up the project and just checking it out before its final finish. The finish that I'm using here is Osmos PolyX. It's a hard wax finish. You simply wipe on the material on the sides here in the back. Then you wipe off any excess with a clean terry cloth. And I wanted to make sure that I got both the sides and the back so that the sign didn't have any excuse for wanting to warp as I was done. Once the back was done, I moved on to the front, and this here is the rewarding part about putting on any finish on some detailed work. There are a lot of colors, a lot of detail that go into this, and you can see as the finish is applied, those colors, those grains, the epoxy shine, it all really just starts to pop out at this point. And this is probably the most rewarding part, to see it all come together right at the very end. And with that, the sign is done. I hope you've enjoyed this video. I enjoyed putting this sign together. If you have any comments, please let me know in the comments section. All I have to do now is package this up and send it off in a box to Scott. He knows a box is coming, so I've asked him for an unboxing video, and I'll include just a little bit of that here at the very end.
I've never seen this before. This is the grand unveiling. What did Jared send me? Alright, come on. Triceps. Oh, for reals? Wait a second. Arrgh. I got me hands deep inside it now. What? Oh my heavens to Murgatroyd. What? Thank you so much. I could cry. The level of detail in this, I mean, this is actually 3D, I mean, like perfectly colored epoxy in there. Like, what kind of wood is this? Must be a rich mahogany.